Okay, well, we are finishing up this week Outline 6, and we are finishing up what we started in the book of Daniel last week. Last week we covered two great prophecies in the book of Daniel that need to be understood for us to be able to understand when we go back to Revelation, which we're actually going to start back in next week. Michael. Okay. I'll start on chapter 4, starting next week. But
great.
The image of in Daniel 2 of the great statue is certainly very important in understanding the kingdoms that come about in the final one that, of course, is discussed in the book of Revelation. Then, of course, we had the prophecy of Daniel 9, which is, as I said, is a quantitative prophecy. And I laid it out for you in terms of the numbers, and we went through and explained, how it occurs, what edict starts off this beginning of 483 years that culminates in the Messiah being declared, which of course occurred on what we call Palm Sunday of that year. And of course, the prophecy is so exact that it literally gives you to the day when they should have known that Messiah would be declared king. Of course, they didn't know the prophecy, and therefore they didn't know the day that they were being visited. Jesus said that if those that were singing the Psalm 118 Messianic prophecy, which is what they were saying as he came, they laid down the palm branches and their cloaks. He said that if they hadn't sung it, the stones would be yelling out the prophecy, because he said this was the day that was appointed, the day of my visitation. So now, in the last verse of the prophecy, Daniel 9, last two, Daniel 9:26 and Daniel 9:27. 26, of course, says that Messiah, after he is revealed, then will be, quote, cut off. That is, he'll become nothing. He will die. And of course, it also states in the prophecy that Jerusalem would be conquered. This must have been an unbelievable thing for them to hear that Messiah would be revealed and then Messiah would die. I'm certain it made absolutely no sense to them at that time. But of course, it's exactly what happened. In the last verse of Daniel 9:27, it then goes to this last week of years, what we call the 70th week of years. We know it as the tribulation period, the last 7 years of normal earth history. And it states that he, which we know as the Antichrist, will make a treaty with the Jews for, quote, 1 week, that is, for 1 week of years. But halfway through it, he will break it, and he will commit what is called the abomination of desolation. That is, he will go into the Jewish temple, he will desecrate it, he will set up an idol of some sort in it, and of course he will declare himself God at that point. And this, according to Daniel 9:27, is the very act that will lead to his destruction. That because of that, God will judge him, and he'll be eventually taken out because of what he does. Now, I want to shift from these two prophecies, and I want to go back to something that we've studied in the past, and I want you to see how it correlates. Things in the Bible have different applications at different times and different ages. And so I want you to see the application of some of the things we've studied to now what is going on at this time. We're going to go back and talk about Nimrod and the Babylonian system. Now, we've talked about Nimrod in the past, and we've talked a little bit about the Babylonian system. But I want you to see how it comes together. I've made the statement that the Antichrist is actually Nimrod version 2. That the fulfillment of what Nimrod started actually has its ultimate fulfillment in what occurs at the very end of this, in Daniel's 70th week. Turn, if you would, to the 9th chapter of Genesis. There are some very, very interesting and rather enigmatic prophecies in the Old Testament. Some of them are more obvious than others, but one of the more enigmatic ones is actually found in Genesis 9, starting in verse 20. So I'm going to read this prophecy. The prophecy is about this event which occurs that seems very strange. And let me read starting at 20-23. Then Noah began farming and planted a vineyard. Now again, he's just recently off the ark. The waters have receded. His family has now gotten out. And of course, they're starting their agricultural process that needs to be. Verse 21, and he drank of the wine and he became drunk. And uncovering himself inside his tent. And Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father and told his two brothers outside. That is, he told Shem and Japheth. But Shem and Japheth took a garment and laid it upon both their shoulders and walked backward and covered the nakedness of their father. And their faces were turned away so that they did not see their father's nakedness. Now, many people have conjectured what this exactly means. Was there some sexual act that occurred? Was there some lewd activity which occurred? The text doesn't really say that. And it would be speculation, and certainly people speculated on this. But there is something obvious in the text that I think that we need to see. And that is that Ham disrespects his father Noah. That is fairly obvious. Where Japheth and Shem do not. Now, it's interesting what we see. Now I want to read verses 24 and 25. When Noah woke from his wine, he knew what his youngest son had done to him. And he said, Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants, he shall be to his brothers. Now, think about that for a moment. Who was it that actually did this? Ham. Yeah. So why does he say, Cursed be Canaan? All right. Why? Well, because
they're going to carry that cursing.
Right. Now,
the third and fourth generation.
Exactly. Now, who becomes the ultimate generation that comes from Ham? When you look at the sons of Ham, if you go over to the 10th chapter, okay, and the sons of Ham were Cush and Mizraim. Mizraim is all the descendants that we call the Egyptians. And Put and Canaan. And the sons of Cush were Seba and Havilah and Sabta and Ramah and Sabtaka. And the sons of Ramah were Sheba and Dedan, which are what we would call Saudi Arabia today. Now here's the key. Verse 8. Now Cush became the father of Nimrod. Okay? So of the Hamite line, we eventually have this person that's discussed extensively in the Old Testament named Nimrod. He now becomes the offspring of Ham generations later. And I think this is the meaning, actually, of this actual prophecy. That because of what Ham did, there was something in him, in his attitude, that was so disrespectful of his father that it continues in the generations after him in his lineage and ultimately comes to its culmination in this person, Nimrod. Okay? This is interesting how God sees this beforehand. He sees what's going to happen before it occurs. And he sees where it's going to lead to. and it leads to something very horrible. And then, of course, we have these verses continuing in the 8th verse of chapter 10. Cush became the father of Nimrod, and he, that is Nimrod, became, the word is chalal, and it means to be changed into. The word refers to genetics. It's a transmutation of the original source. His biology somehow gets changed into a mighty one of the earth. That is the Hebrew word Giborim. So he no longer, at that point, Nimrod is no longer a normal human being. He is a hybrid. Okay? He apparently has hybrid strength and hybrid size and hybrid abilities, which have a supernatural nature to them. And then it says in verse 9, he was a mighty hunter. And the word here used often is before, terrible translation. It literally means in opposition to. He was a mighty hunter in opposition to the Lord. Therefore, it is said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter in opposition to the Lord. In other words, he was known for his incredible rebellion and opposition. What does his name mean? It means, let us rebel. That's what his name means. His whole mentality and everything he did was built around absolute rebellion towards God and the standards and the way of God. And of course, he begins to build great cities. Babel, that is Babylon, that we're studying, talking about, and Erech and Akkad and Calneh in the land of Shinar, that is the plain there that Babylon is built on, the Shinar plain. And of course, from that land, he went forth into Assyria, and he builds Nineveh, which was a huge city in the ancient world, and Rehoboth and Calah, and it goes on and talks about these large cities. If you look at the archaeology of these cities, they had monstrously tall walls. I mean, some of their walls were 400 feet tall. And you go, why would they build 400-foot tall walls? Do you have a suspicion why?
They're giant.
Part of it. And I think there's another reason why.
King Kong.
No, dear. Not King Kong.
King Kong. King Kong, she said.
What happened to Noah? Exactly. It appears that he was preparing against the idea that there would be another flood. He obviously didn't believe God. He obviously didn't follow God. And he was doing everything he could to establish his kingdom on earth in these ways. Okay? So, we go on and we see these things that occur. Now, Nimrod also builds this tower. We call it the Tower of Babel. And we know, both from the text and from archaeology, that this was an astrological, large building. The top of it was, for the purpose, they had on top of it, apparently was the zodiac. They did astrology on the top, and its purpose was to access the spiritual realm. That's why Babylon means, literally, in the original language, the gates of the gods. That is, opening up a gateway to the gods. The gods don't refer to the Lord. They refer to the fallen angels. Yes.
Was it completed?
Apparently not. Apparently it was not, because God obviously saw what they were trying to accomplish and the unbelievable problems that it would occur and how it was a satanic plan to undermine God's plan. Okay? And so he stopped it. You know, in the book of Jubilees, it's claimed that this tower was 8,000 and almost 500 feet tall. Now, you say, well, how could that be? Well, look at some of the great buildings that have been built around the world. The Great Pyramid at Giza, some of the great works in Peru, okay, and things like that. You tell me how they were built. Engineers today cannot tell you how they were built. They cannot tell you how they cut those stones. They cannot tell you how they got them up 10,000-foot mountains. No one knows that. Well, the evidence seems to be, or our belief is, they had fallen angelic technology. And that's how they were able to accomplish these things. That's how they were able to make laser cuts, literally, in all these stones to fit them together. And again, these things are all over the world. So we see here that Nimrod sets up as the first transhumanist, literally what he was. He sets up a political, economic, religious, globalist system that is in direct opposition to God's plan. That's what he was doing. And that's why God stopped it. He is the partial fulfillment, as I say here in point 7, of the serpent seed that's mentioned in Genesis 3:15. Remember that first prophecy? There would be the seed of the woman that would ultimately culminate through the generations and culminate in the birth of Christ and his redeeming nature. And then there's the seed of the serpent, which would be satanic strategy for the earth, which would accomplish all these other things and actually accomplishes what we're going to look at here in a minute, which is the 70th week of Daniel. That will be the ultimate pinnacle of the strategy of the serpent seed. Now, the final fulfillment of the Babylonian system is found of Nimrod, and his type is found, of course, in Revelation chapter 17 in this story or this account of the great harlot who rides the beast. She is the great prophetess of false teaching and false religions. She rides or controls for a period of time this beast that ends up having 10 heads and 10 horns, all right, which is the geopolitical system that she, for a period of time, is in control of. And we see here that, of course, 3 of these entities, these political areas or regions of the world, end up being deposed eventually by this, quote, little horn that Daniel talks about, which, of course, the little horn is called the Antichrist. Okay? He deposes them. He ends up doing away with the woman, interestingly enough. He uses her, he accomplishes things with her, and ends up doing her in. Why? Because in the final analysis, halfway through the tribulation period at 3.5 years, what does he do? Exactly. And he does this thing called the abomination of desolation and sets himself up as God in the Jewish temple to be worshipped by all of the world. That's what we just read in Daniel 9:27. So, Antichrist erects a system that we could call Babylon 2, and of course he could very much be called Nimrod 2. That is the ultimate fulfillment. Now, I want you to go for a minute from Genesis. Isn't it great? We go from one end of the Bible to the other. Now go to the 17th chapter of the book of Revelation. Because I want to look for just a minute at some of the features of this system. We're going to be talking about this, of course, starting next week when we start back in Revelation. It's a system that we are seeing occurring right now in our world. 17. Chapter 17. So let's look at some of the aspects of, let's read 17, and then I want to show you 8 or 9 or 10 aspects of it that are important. And again, you can keep them in mind. You can think about how they're occurring today, and we'll get back to them as we progress through the book of Revelation. So let me read 17. And one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and spoke to me, saying, "Come here, I shall show you the judgment of the great harlot who sits on many waters." I'm going to explain this to you in a minute. So let me just read it now. "With whom the kings of the earth committed acts of immorality, and those who dwell on the earth were made drunk with the wine of her immorality. And he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, full of blasphemous names, having 7 heads and 10 horns. And the woman was clothed in purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, having in her hand a golden cup of abominations and of the unclean things of her immorality. And upon her forehead a name was written, a mystery. And literally in the text in the Greek, in the original scripts, it's all capitalized here. Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and of the abominations of the earth. Now the fact that it's capitalized should tell you it's pretty important. It's an important element that occurs on the earth. And I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the witnesses of Jesus. And when I saw her, I wondered greatly. And in a minute, I'm going to go back to that verse and tell you what I think the significance of John's comment is.
American Standard Bible Greek.
Now, the angel said to me, why do you wonder? I shall tell you the mystery of the woman and the beast that carries her, which has the 7 heads and the 10 horns. The beast that you saw was and is not and is about to come out of the abyss and to go to destruction. Now, that should be very clear to you. I don't think that needs any explanation, right? You understand what he's saying? He's saying the beast is a system that was and is again, and finally its end goes to destruction. So it's a system. Go ahead.
Satan's system.
Yes, but it's a very specific system. Remember going back to the Daniel 2 prophecy. We have the last 2 parts, okay, before the great stone comes down out of heaven and smites all the other elements of the statue. We have the first part of it, which is described as the Roman Empire. And then the second part of it, which is described as some updated version of the Roman Empire. What we correct. What we would call Rome version 2. Now notice, the Roman Empire is never destroyed like the other empires are. Greece fell. Okay? Babylon fell. Persia fell. They were conquered. Rome was never actually conquered. It eventually, well, there was war against it by the Muslims, but eventually it merged into a bunch of other cultures, separated into different countries, which is what we had in the medieval era of our history. But it was never conquered, literally, in that sense. It's going to, according to Daniel, and here, as we're reading, it comes back in another version. And it's the version that we're seeing today. Now, he says, and those who dwell on the earth will wonder whose name has not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they see the beast, that he was and is not and will come. Here is the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. Mountains in biblical symbolism usually mean political entities or ruling places. So there's going to be these 7 entities, these political ruling spheres. And they are 7 kings. Now you see more clearly. There are 7 kings or leaders. 5 have fallen. 1 is, and the other has not yet come. And when he comes, he must remain a little while. I can explain that to you, but I'm not going to right this moment. Let's continue reading. And the beast which was and is not is himself also an ape, and is one of the 7, and he goes to destruction. And the 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings, who have not yet received the kingdom, but they will receive authority as kings with the beast for 1 hour. So again, see the difference. The woman is different than the beast. The beast is political. The woman is not political. The woman is religious. Remember that. She represents a religious system in the earth. The beast is the political entity that controls the world. these have, it says, these have one purpose, and they will give their power and authority to the beast. These will wage war against the Lamb, and the Lamb will overcome them, because he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and those who are with him are the called and chosen and faithful. And he said to me, the waters which you saw, where the harlot sits, are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. And the 10 horns which you saw, and the beast, these will hate the harlot, and will make her desolate and naked, and will eat her flesh, and will burn her up with fire. So isn't it interesting that even though she rides on the beast, and the beast supports her, at a point in time, the beast turns on her and destroys her. Okay? And for God has put it in their hearts to execute his purpose by having a common purpose and by giving their kingdom to the beast until the words of God should be fulfilled. And the woman who you saw is the great city which reigns over the kings of the earth. Now, let me make some points about this chapter. It says that the woman, that is, sits on, and the beast sits on many waters. That's mentioned both in 17 chapter 1 and in 17 chapter 15. That means the scope of this kingdom and her influence is international. Many waters, many peoples. The whole world. Okay? It's not just a regional area. She is called the mother of harlots, of blasphemy, and she represents what we term religious syncretism, meaning the merging of religious systems together into one massive globalist ecumenical religious system. In chapter 17, verse 18 that we just read, it states that the focus somehow is related to the great city, which I believe is probably Rome. Part of the reason why I think it's Rome is because John refers to it as the great city as he's talking about this. This may well mean that the Catholic Church is one of the elements that merge together with other elements to become this blasphemous, idolatrous religious system. And I think we're seeing that, unfortunately. We've just seen the Pope meet with a couple of very large imams of the Muslim world. And what is it that the meetings have said? What has come out of it? What have they said?
They were in agreement with a lot of things. Yeah.
Absolutely. They said we worship the same God, which is absolute blasphemy. Okay? That is not the same God. They've said that they have things in common. They've called themselves brothers. Okay? They are trying to merge together Catholicism with Islam into this Chrislam combination. We've seen, interestingly enough, the leader of the Russian Orthodox Church meeting with the Pope also, and for the first time in 1,000 years, okay, they are trying to find common ground. They have been separated for a good 1,000 years based on differences of belief. They've now met together and said, again, similar things. We have these things in common, etc., etc. We're seeing an increasing syncretism between these various religious systems. Notice that the world in the future is not a-religious. It is syncretic in its religious system. You don't have a problem if you say you're religious, even today in the world. But if you say that you believe that there's one way, then there's a big problem with you. If you say that you have the ultimate truth, there's a big problem with you. If you say Christ is the Messiah and he is the way to truth, there's a big problem that the world has with you. But if you say that in the generic sense you're spiritual, and you say that everyone has the same pathway to God despite the religious system, then you're fine. That's syncretism. And that's what we're seeing develop more and more and more in the world. Now, it also says that this whore, this prostitute, is clothed with purple, scarlet, and gold. That is that part of the element that drives and is a part of the system is materialism. That it's driven by power and the desire for money, which of course are the two things that drive most political and religious and political systems in the entire world and always has. Interestingly enough, as I said, this whore temporarily controls the kings of the earth. This whore is antagonistic to the true church because she is the false church. Notice that the whore is, as I said, is not a political system, and it is not the political system that kills the saints that are talked about here, but rather it's the religious system that kills the saints. Keep that in mind. Pay attention, because I think we have the idea that the antagonism that we're going to first get is from the political systems of the world. And that's not what we're told. We're told that the great persecution is going to come from the religious system that occurs. So keep it in mind as you view what's going on in the world. John says in 17:6, and I'll go back and read it to you. He says, "And I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the witnesses of Jesus. And when I saw her, I wondered greatly." Now think about this. John is writing this. He's, of course, on Patmos. Why is he there?
In exile.
He's been exiled. What system has exiled him? Who politically exiled him?
Romans.
The Romans. He knows of the Roman system. He knows of the Roman oppression. He knows of the Roman invasion of Israel. He knows of the Roman Empire. He knows of the Roman legions. He's living in it. And he looks at what he's being shown here, and he's amazed. Now think about it. Why is he amazed?
Because she kills the saints, the ones that believe in Jesus.
Yeah, but he's amazed who isn't doing it and who is doing it. Here's this entire complex militaristic Roman system. It's not primarily the one that's doing this that he's being showed. It's not the political system that's primarily doing it. It's the religious system that's doing it. So he's going, wow, this is different. I'm amazed. Now also, we see that this whore is loved by the world system. It is the endorsed religious system of the last days. It is sustained, and again, important to realize, it is sustained and energized by the power of Satan. You say, well, how do you know that? Well, the way I know it is actually going into the 18th chapter and reading verse 2. "And he cried out with a mighty voice, saying, Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great, and she has become a dwelling place of demons and a prison of every unclean spirit and a prison of every unclean and hateful bird." In other words, the system is absolutely, totally, from top to bottom, satanic. It's driven by the satanic system. It's driven by the doctrine of demons. So that's where it gets its power. Now, it's called Mystery Babylon because it's a revived system. Babylon quit being an empire, but it comes back as a form of another empire. That's its mystery. It also involves the mystery religious system. Okay? Just like in Babylon there are mystery religions, this system will be filled with the mystery religions. That is the culmination of all this syncretistic religious system that occurs. Also, it's amazing how this system is unbelievably arrogant. Look at verse 14 of chapter 17. "These will wage war against the Lamb." Now, I'm telling you, I can excuse someone for not understanding who Christ is. Okay? But it's hard for me to excuse someone that has the arrogance to believe that they can actually wage war and win against him. Okay? It's an unbelievable level of satanically inspired arrogance. Okay? It's unbelievable.
Just as Satan was arrogant in heaven.
Yes.
Fell.
Absolutely. The second aspect that demonstrates this arrogance is actually in the next chapter, chapter 18 of verse 7. And I'll read the verse 7. It says, to the degree that she glorified herself and lived sensuously, which tells you how immoral people are going to be in this system, because that's what the word means, to the same degree, give her torment and mourning, for she says in her heart, the system says in her heart, I sit as a queen and am not a widow and will never see mourning. In other words, I'm unbeatable. And of course, what is it that John is told? And for this reason, in one day, her plagues will come upon her. And she will be done. So the Antichrist will do away with this religious system because he will change it to a monotheism. Everyone worship him. So we'll end up, ultimately, in the final 3.5 years, only with the worship of the Antichrist. Now, I want to bring up a question for you. And I'm not saying I have necessarily a complete answer to it, but I'm going to bring it up. I'm especially going to pose this to Gary as well as everyone else. Having read what we read about the blood of the saints, and the things that we just, it says that they drink from the blood of the saints. That this system, quote, persecutes what he calls my people. That's found in Revelation 18 verse 4. And I heard another voice from heaven saying, come out of her, my people, that you may not participate in her sins and that you may not receive her plagues. Now, through the book of Revelation, there's obviously considerable martyrdom. Would you agree? There's a lot of Christians killed through this apparent 7-year period. The question I have is, if that's the case, who is left? Who is it that are my people at this time?
John's people? Jews? 144.
Well, there's going to be them. But I would think that if that's really who he's talking about, he would be identifying that 144,000.
They were sealed.
They were, and therefore, you're right. They are not going to be killed. But I think it's hard to believe that he's only referring to that 144,000 as being my people, because he's saying to them that they also shouldn't become entangled in the system.
At some point, their eyes will be open.
Well, but the point at which the Jews' eyes will be open is when Jerusalem is virtually captured at the very end before the Battle of Armageddon, at the culmination. They don't come to him as Messiah before that happens. Agree? I think it's Zechariah tells us that. Okay, so that they're not going to be believing until the very end, where they recognize the Messiah and cry out. Is it possible? I'm going to ask you: is this system that we're reading about here actually begins prior to the 7-year period of tribulation, and so that the bulk of who is martyred may even begin before the 7-year period? If that could be true, then it actually begins before the actual technical 7 years, and there's a persecution, martyrdom goes on that time. Then it brings up the interesting question of, does this jive with the pre-tribulation rapture view? I will leave that question with you to ponder. I'm not telling you one way or the other. I just think it's an interesting question to think about in view of what's going on. So,
I agree.
We'll see. These things are very, they're very interesting to consider as you look at the verses and you ask yourself questions. Now,
it sounds like though the people that are being martyred are in the tribulation at that time.
They certainly are under the system at that time. We don't know exactly when the beginning of the 7 years is. We know when the midpoint is. We don't know when the first beginning is, do we? We have no time frame that tells us it begins here. We know where the middle is.
Do I have the right to remain silent? The only place we find a starting point is the covenant that's entered into that allows the Jews to have their temple and offer sacrifice.
Yes.
At the beginning, that seems to start the 7-year time clock. Other than that, we really don't have much of a handle on what happens to them.
Right. Yeah, I'm afraid we're going to see it before maybe the 7 years actually starts. The time clock starts in Daniel 17. But we will see. These things will become more clear as we get closer to them. That always happens in prophecy.
Aren't we already seeing it?
We're seeing it some. We're certainly seeing it in the Mideast.
Pain, at least at the beginning, pain. Well, there's a lot of martyrdom going on.
In the Middle East, there's a tremendous amount of martyrdom going on.
The tribulation is just the same coming against the same.
No. Now, I'm going to give you a history lesson.
Wow.
I hope you are open for a history lesson, but I find that this is a history that's not often well understood. And it's the history of the time from the end of Daniel's life to the time of Christ. This is what some people call the silent years or the intertestamental period. But there were a lot of things going on during that time. So I want to talk to you about some of them, and I want to do it from the standpoint of looking at the 11th chapter of Daniel. So turn, if you would, to the book of Daniel, to the 11th chapter.
Right where I'm studying.
Okay. Now, let me tell you, our best estimate would be, and I think we're probably within 5 or 10 years of being able to be, because we know when Daniel went into captivity, and we know he apparently wrote this towards the end of his life, still in Babylon. Well, he never got out of Babylon. So he started there in 605, and we know that he ended up being an old man, and we know that the Jews, of course, around 535, some of them were released back into Israel during the time of Ezra and Nehemiah. I'm going to say that this writing of this occurred probably around 540 BC, within a few years. I think that would be fair. Gary, would you agree that it's got to be fairly close to that time when Daniel wrote this prophecy?
Pretty close.
Okay. Now, the thing that's amazing about these, and I'm going to go over this not because I want you to remember everything we're going to talk about here, but it's an amazing prophecy that Daniel wrote in about 535 or 540 BC. None of these events even occurred until 250 years after he wrote it. Okay? The events we're going to talk about start in around 300 BC and go to about 160 or 164 BC. So I want to show you during that time that there were a lot of things going on. Now, the thing to understand, and now you can look at the map. The best explanation for what goes on here is to realize that the Seleucid Empire, which is the north, you understand, remember where the Seleucid Empire came from?
Syria.
No. Well, it's Persian in its area, but where did it come from? It came from the breakdown of Greece, the Greek Empire.
Right.
And the four generals. Okay, and one of the generals was named Seleucid, and one of the generals was named Ptolemy. And that's why you have the Ptolemaic kingdom, which is Egypt, and you have the Seleucid kingdom, which we would call Persia. Right? And so you have generations of Ptolemaic kings, and you have generations of Seleucid kings, starting especially around 450, 400 BC and going down to about, again, 165 or so. Now, the key point is this. We're going to read all the battles that occur between these two kingdoms, back and forth.
Yeah.
So the Seleucids move down and have battles with the Ptolemaics, and the Ptolemaics move up and have battles with the Seleucids. And who's in the middle? Israel. It's important to understand the map to understand what happens to Israel. They were always in the middle of the troop movements. So that's part of what happens to them. Now, let's look at Daniel 11. I'm going to read a few things, and I'm going to explain a little bit to you. I find this an amazing prophecy because it's so specific. It's so specific. Starting verse 5 of Daniel 11. Then the king, this is Ptolemy I, okay, down there in the Egyptian area. King Ptolemy I of the south will grow strong, along with one of his princes, who will gain ascendancy over him and obtain dominion, and his domain will be a great dominion indeed. And after some years, they will form an alliance. And the daughter of the king of the south, who is now the next generation, it's Ptolemy II, his daughter, okay, will come to the king of the north, that is the Seleucid, up here to the northeast, to carry out a peaceful arrangement. But she will not retain her position of power, nor he remain with his power, but she will be given up along with those who brought her in, and the one who sired her, as well as those who supported her in those times. Ptolemy I arranges a marriage of his daughter with Antiochus the first of the Seleucid Empire. Okay? That woman, who is his daughter, who marries, they're married for a period of time, and then he abandons the marriage from her, we know from historical records. And he ends up being killed. Okay? Done.
She is also killed.
She ends up being killed, but she sires, has children, and they have some interesting relatives. So let's keep reading. Okay? But one of the descendants, okay, this is now Ptolemy III, okay, of her line, will rise in his place, and he will come against their army and enter the fortress of the king of the north. There's another battle. And he will deal with them and display great strength. And also their gods with their metal images and their precious vessels of silver and gold, he will take back into captivity into Egypt. And he, on his part, will remain from attacking the king of the north for some years. Actually, that occurs in a big battle in 246 BC. Thus, the latter will enter the realm of the king of the south, but he will return to his own land. Now, go over to, I want you to drop down now to, let's go down to verse 21. After a couple generations, there's a Seleucid king called Antiochus Epiphanes. Okay? Let's read starting in verse 21. And in his place, a despicable person will arise. That's Antiochus, a despicable person, on whom the honor of kingship has not been conferred. He kind of stole his kingship by having a rebellion in the court and killing some people and taking over and installing himself as king. Notice this. This is now 300 and some years from the time that Daniel gives this prophecy. All right? 300 years ahead of time, Daniel's telling you all these details in this prophecy. He says, but he will come in a time of tranquility and seize the kingdom by intrigue. And the overflowing forces will be flooded away before him and shattered, and also the prince of the covenant. And after an alliance is made with him, he will practice deception, and he will go up and gain power with a small force of people. And in time of tranquility, he will enter the richest part of the realm, and he will accomplish what his fathers never did, nor his ancestors. He will distribute plunder and booty and possessions among them, and he will devise his schemes against strongholds, but only for a time. And he will stir up his strength and courage against the king of the south with a large army, so that the king of the south will mobilize an extremely large and mighty army for war. But he will not stand, for schemes will be devised against him. And those who eat his choice food will destroy him and his army, so he's going to be assassinated, which is exactly what happens. Okay? And his army will overflow, but many will fall down. As for both kings and their hearts will be intent on evil, and they will speak lies to each other at the same table, but it will not succeed, for in the end is still to come to be appointed. And then he will return to his land with much plunder, but his heart will be set against the holy covenant. So what does he start to do when he comes back after this? He trumps back through Israel again, the Holy Land, the Holy Covenant. And he will take action and then return to his own land. And at the appointed time, he will return and come into the south. But this last time, it will not turn out the way it did before. For the ships of Kittim, which refers to the Roman troops, Rome, the Empire of Rome, has now become a strong military force, will come against him. Therefore, he will be disheartened and will return and become enraged at the Holy Covenant and take action. So he will come back and show regard for those who forsake the Holy Covenant. In other words, he gets defeated in the battle by the Romans, okay, in a naval battle significantly. He then comes back again, going through Israel. He's rather angry at this point at his loss, and so who does he start to attack? The Jews. This is now around 175 BC. Okay? Verse 31. And forces from him will arise and desecrate the sanctuary fortress and do away with the regular sacrifice, and they will set up the abomination of desolation. Okay? So what does he do?
Sacrifices of pigs on the altar.
In the Holy of Holies, spreads the blood all over the altar, all over the Ark of the Covenant at this point, okay, over the holy place, and sets up an image of the god Zeus in the temple. That's called the abomination of desolation. Okay? It says then, and thus those who have insight among the people will give understanding, and yet they will fall by sword and by flame and by captivity and by plunder for many days. What that refers to is there is an uprising, a small uprising among the Jews during that time. They try to throw off Antiochus Epiphanes, but they don't succeed in their slaughter. And when they fall, they will be granted a little help, and many will join them in hypocrisy. And some of those who have insight will fall in order to refine, purge, and make them pure until the end time, because it is still to come at the appointed time. Now, from about 175 BC to 164 BC, Antiochus makes the Jews miserable. He taxes them to death. He kills, they estimate, at least hundreds of thousands of them, if not 1 million of them. He persecutes them horribly. There arises in Israel a man named Judas Maccabee. He comes from the tribe of Judah, okay, and he becomes a general. He starts a Jewish force. They develop a small army, and he goes to war against actually the father of Antiochus Epiphanes, who is called Antiochus V. He has several battles. The most famous of them is called the Battle of Emmaus, where he defeats the forces of Antiochus V, and he frees Jerusalem from the power of the Seleucid dynasty for the first time in a long, long, long time. They therefore go into the temple, they clean it up, they make it holy again by Jewish ritual and custom, and they sacrifice on the 14th of December of 164 AD. We call that day in Jewish tradition now Hanukkah. That is what Hanukkah is. It's a tradition of the temple being put back into its proper service as a result of Judas Maccabeus conquering Jerusalem and being able to free it. So the Jews, interestingly enough, from about 164 to 68 BC, actually have about 100 years of freedom. They're not controlled by the Romans during that time. They've thrown off the Seleucid Empire. They're not bothered by the Ptolemaic Empire. And they have about 100 years of autonomy and freedom until about 68 BC. At that point, the Roman troops roll in. The Roman Empire is in the height of its military conquest. They come through Jerusalem and into Israel and through Jerusalem and just completely dominate it. And of course, this sets up for the political system that we know about and read about in Luke 2. Okay, because what does it say about the time of Jesus' birth? In the days of Augustus Caesar, okay, and it talks about the Roman system, and it talks about, and we know about Pontius Pilate. So the Roman system is now the dominant system at the time at which Christ is born and the time at which he lives his life and his ministry. So, you've now had your brief history lesson on that 300 or 400 years in between the last prophet, Malachi, as it were, and of course the time of Christ.
Can I ask a question?
You can. I may not be able to answer, but you can ask it.
In Daniel, it's divided into 7 weeks, 62 weeks, and 1 week.
Yes.
Does the first 7 weeks end about the time of Malachi?
No.
When does that first 7 weeks end?
It would end, it should end literally right around, subtract from 444 BC, subtract 49 years. 444 BC to 49 years, subtract 49 years, that should be the end of the first 7 weeks. So what's that come to? 3.
Yeah. 9. 3 is 93.
Okay. That would be the end of the first 7 weeks. Okay. I don't know that anyone knows exactly why he breaks it into 7 weeks and 62 weeks, and then, I mean, it's clear why it's broken into the last week.
Right.
Because there's obviously a huge gap of time between the end of the 69th week and the 70th week, which of course we call the tribulation, 7-year period. Questions? I didn't go through this about the intertestamental period to have you understand all the history of it. I wanted you to understand a little bit of the history of it, to see a lot of things were going on, and what the transition was between that time after Daniel, the time of Ezra and Nehemiah, and then, of course, the time that comes when Christ is born and during his ministry. So, we're going to summarize this by going to Psalm chapter 2. Because it's a fantastic psalm and it summarizes a lot of what we have just talked about. You're there in Psalm 2. He says, why are the nations in an uproar? The word literally means in the Hebrew, in rebellion. Okay? Why are the nations in rebellion? And the peoples devising a vain thing. I think you're going to figure out as we read what the vain thing is that they're trying to devise. The kings of the earth take their stand, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed. So what's the vain thing? What's their vain plan?
About to annihilate Israel.
And
To be fed up with God.
And to undo the ongoing plan of God that will lead to Messiah. Okay? That's the vain thing. In other words, they want control over the earth. They want the geopolitical control. And yet, in the Psalm, God's saying, no. Oh, what you do is a vain thing, and it will not lead you to the autonomy that you think you're going to get. It will not occur. They say, now this is actually the peoples, the kings and the people speaking in verse 3, let us tear the fetters apart and cast away the cords from us. In other words, what are they saying?
We're bound up somehow. We want to break out.
And why? For what? For what purpose? What are they bound by? What do they want to break free from? Go back to Nimrod. What's his name mean? let us rebel. It's the same spirit here. They're saying, let us rebel. We want to be our own people. We want to do our own things. We want to control our own nations. We want to do it our way, not God's way. Think you're seeing that today in the geopolitical situation in the world?
Yeah.
And look at God's response, starting in 4. He who sits in the heavens laughs. The Lord scoffs at them. You know? Then he will speak to them in his anger and terrify them in his fury. But as for me, I have installed my king upon Zion, my holy mountain. In other words, he's saying the plan is for Messiah the King, the anointed, coming back to the earth. And what does he do at the point at which he returns, at the height of the battle of Armageddon? All of these nations in war with each other, trying to do in Israel finally. What's he do? It immediately stops. The king has come to the earth. He installs his kingdom. That is the final kingdom of Daniel 2. The stone that crushes all the other kingdoms and enlarges itself and becomes the final kingdom of the earth, starting with the 1,000 years of millennial rule of Christ. And again, he says in 7, verse 7, I will surely tell you of the decree of the Lord. He said to me, thou art my son. Today have I begotten thee. So now it's very clear this person is the Messiah. So, all of these things the nations of the earth do. You know, think about the insanity of the UN Agenda 21 plan. They have an economic system for the earth. They have a climate system for the earth. They have, quote, an immigration system of the earth. They have an economic system of the earth. They're determined that they're going to come up with a globalist plan that's going to, quote, save the earth. Man is going to save man. But of course, what is it? Psalm 2, what a vain thing. Man almost destroys man, not saves him. All of these plans are insanity. It's why when you look at what's going on in the world, you look at the events going on, you look at what's going on in Syria, you look at 120 nations in military exercises right now on the face of the earth, and you say, stuff's insane. That's why. Because it's inspired by the devil. It's his plan. It's the culmination of the seed of the serpent and his plans for the earth. That's why it can't be reasoned with. That's why you can't talk to your relatives and make them see sense.
Exactly.
Because they're blinded by the system. They can't see out of it right now. It's the only thing that makes sense to them, even though it's complete insanity to us. You know? It's the overall, man wants to save himself religiously by his works. He wants to save himself economically by changing the economic system of the world, including the mark of the beast, what's going on in the banking system. He wants to save himself through political maneuverings and alliances and treaties, and it's all going to come to the same thing. An eventual, final, global war. And I think it isn't very hard to look at the headlines and see that we're awfully close. You know, when have we ever seen 120 nations at the same time in major military exercises? When have we ever seen 350,000 troops sitting on the northern border of Saudi Arabia, close to Syria? When have we seen these things? Have you ever seen them before? Have you ever known it happen? They're unique events that are occurring in the world. So, at any rate, this gets you to the end of the Old Testament, and the themes, I'll just mention here, some of the themes, and I just mentioned a few of them. I'm certain there's many, many more. You know, the theme of the king of Babylon and his predecessor, Nimrod. and his future descendant, Antichrist. The second theme is satanic transhumanism. We'll see that when we talk about Antichrist in the book of Revelation. We see the importance of prophetic dreams and the importance of the prophet Daniel. Can't really understand the book of Revelation without understanding those two prophecies. We see the sabbatical year's constant significance in God's timing. He uses it over and over and over and over again. You know, it's like we said before. God's calendar is exact. The world will eventually function by his calendar. He set it up. The seasons, the times, the epochs, and the eras.
The sabbatical year, for 7 years, is that the 490 years?
Judah refused to obey the sabbatical year for 490 years. Therefore, they missed 7 Shemitahs. They missed 7 rest years, 70 rest years. Mm-hmm. So God said, finally, you're in timeout. It's called Babylon for 70 years. That's why they spent exactly that amount of time there. Mm-hmm. We see the importance of the historical events and their types in multiple fulfillments. It's amazing the typology in the Bible. You know, we were talking today, Anishka and I were talking about the fact she's reading Numbers, and she was talking about, you know, how when the people come out of Egypt and they're thirsty the first time, you know, they go to Rephidim, I believe it was, and they're crying out, we're thirsty, we're going to die, and everything. And God says to Moses, okay, go to that rock, which we know exists this very day because we have pictures of it actually in Saudi Arabia. He says, and strike it. Okay? And water will come out. Now, the second time around in Numbers, they're doing the same, pulling the same stunt, and God says, go to this rock and speak to it. And what does Moses do? Because he's furious with them, he strikes it. And God says, you're in timeout for doing it. Now you go, isn't that unreasonable of God that he puts Moses in timeout? But he broke the typology. Okay? What happens? The rock that is struck, who is Jesus called over and over again in the Old Testament into the New? What does we say to Peter? Upon this rock I will build my church. Okay? He is the rock. He is in Daniel, the final great stone that comes down and crushes the other empires and becomes the huge mountain that rules. Okay? So, how often is the rock struck? Once. He's crucified one time. And so that's why he objected to what Moses did. He broke the typology.
Didn't he strike it twice?
Yes. Okay. Now, here's a further thing. Jesus is at the well. Okay? With the Samaritan woman. And he asks for some water, and she gives him some water. And he says, you know, if you really understood who you were talking to, you would ask me for water, because my water
is
living water. And you'll never need to drink again. He is the living water. The water that came out there in the wilderness is an image of him. It's the living water. When Jesus has died on the cross, and the two are on either side of him, they're not dead. So the Roman soldiers come over and break their legs so that they suffocate quickly. They can be taken off the cross. Do they break his legs? No. Why? Because in Isaiah it's prophesied not a bone of his will be broken. So what do? They take a spear, which is wood, like a staff, and they stab it in the side, and out comes water and blood. Okay? The images start in the Old Testament. They carry all the way into the New Testament. So we see, even though many times the people in the Old Testament didn't know what they were doing, they didn't understand the significance of what they're doing, that significance carries through and becomes a way of teaching and the plan of God all the way into the New Testament. All the images there are fulfilled finally in the New Testament. If you look at it, it's unbelievably precise. Thing after thing. You know, we miss it often because we don't understand enough of the Old Testament. We miss it often because we don't understand enough about Judaism. The more you understand, the more you understand the things that the apostles did, what Jesus did, They're fulfillments of Old Testament things in a New Testament way. So, at any rate, so of the 440 verses in the book of Revelation, there's over 800 images from the Old Testament. I hope now, as we go back into Revelation, now we know, we'll understand a lot of these images. And so it'll become much easier to understand what's being taught here by John, being shown by the angel in the book of Revelation. Questions, comments, opinions, trouble?